When I think back over all my memories of my mother, I would say that most of her life was devoted to caring for others and putting their well-being before her own. First and foremost in her life came my father, Zichrono Livracha. My parents already knew each other as youngsters in Frankfurt. After reading through a number of the Tishlieds and poems that were presented at the time of their wedding, it was apparent that they were predestined for each other already back then. Of course, they didn't think of getting married until they were in a position of supporting themselves and capable of being independent.
Really?
For that reason, my parents were both around 27 years old when they married. It was a very good marriage, and my mother was a devoted wife. From the first thing in the morning, when she would make sure that his breakfast was waiting for him when he came into the kitchen, until making sure that my father had his peace and quiet in the evening, so that he could devote his time to learning and reading, she was the true Eshes Chayil. And even though we all knew that there were times when she would much rather have gone out to spend time with friends or go to a movie, she would never complain. In fact, she was extremely proud of my father and all that he accomplished and never hesitated to say so. The only time my mother ever showed any frustration was when they did go out somewhere. She was always ready on time, but had to wait for my father, who of course was always late and took much longer to get ready. I must admit, and Shuli will back me up, that this is one Yerusha from my father which I'm not too proud of. After my father came Miri, Ricky, and me. We all had our special relationship with my mother, and one thing we always knew was that we could never want for a better ally than her. Not that she didn't discipline us, but it was always in such a loving way that, at least as far as I can remember, I would feel so guilty for doing something wrong, whether at home or at school, because it might upset her. Not that this always stopped me, but then my father wasn't quite as understanding. What I later found out was that as a child, believe it or not, my mother was somewhat of a troublemaker in school. Because of this, she was always sympathetic to us if we had gotten into trouble. My father, on the other hand, was always the well-behaved, brave, studious boy, and therefore could not understand when his own children didn't behave that way. Of course, this mostly applied to Ricky and me. I think the worst thing Miri ever did was look out the window during French class at the little fellows. As a child, I clearly remember getting extremely impatient walking down Bennett Avenue with my mother. It seemed to me that she knew everyone we passed, and we had to stop and say hello and chat for a minute until we could continue. I recall asking her once whether she actually knew everyone she greeted. Her matter-of-fact reply was, no, one has to be polite to people. It was for that reason, as Aryeh said before, that someone, and I think it was Tante Meta, once nicknamed her the mayor of Bennett Avenue. The governor of Bennett Avenue, excuse me. When it came to her parents, and later on her parents-in-law, my mother, as you all know, was a devoted daughter. We've all heard how upon arriving in this country as a teenager, she went to work as a cleaning girl to help support the family. She never complained or was too proud. She always told the story that one time, the woman she worked for made her wash the windows from the outside. One day a policeman came upstairs and threatened to fine the woman for making my mother do such dangerous work. After that, my mother became one of the first teachers at the newly founded kindergarten of the Kehillah. Since many of the women in the community had to work, there was no age requirement, and she often had to pick up the children in their baby carriages. She was always proud when in later years, some of the more prominent members of the Kehillah still referred to her as Tante Sophie. Later on, she was able to go to secretarial school and got a job at a company called Dover Foods. She still continued to give a portion of her wages to the household. Not only did she give part of her salary, but she also found out that she was giving part of her wardrobe away as well. You see, as she was earning a decent salary, my mother enjoyed buying herself nice clothes. The problem was that she often came home to find that Uma had given some of her things away to the newly arrived immigrants who inevitably came to her for help. She wasn't thrilled, but she never said a word. After my parents were married, my mother treated her in-laws as she did her own parents. We all knew that my grandmother, Mumi, was not always the easiest person. Yet my mother always put on a smile and did what she was told. I think it was Uma who once told my mother that in the world to come she would have a special little seat next to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because she was such a good daughter-in-law.